So many healthcare providers are touched by burnout, compassion fatigue, or even PTSD at some point during their careers. Today is the first of my two-part conversation with a CRNA who is doing the hard work of learning to handle his own trauma while also helping other healthcare providers do the same. Plus, we mix in a bit of hypnosis as well. This was a really powerful conversation for me, so let's get to it. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and my guest today is a nurse anesthetist who runs a support group for other providers. And he's getting to the bottom of why so many healthcare professionals suffer from burnout and compassion fatigue. Rodney Overstreet was born into a nursing family and felt called to heal from an early age. While he spends his career putting people to sleep, now he's working to help them wake up. He's a consulting hypnotist and has also completed hypnosis for pain management training. Rodney's had several friends and colleagues suffer from substance use disorder and death from addiction and suicide. He's the founder of Heal Our Healers, a website and Facebook group that seeks to help healthcare providers learn about and recover from burnout, compassion fatigue, and PTSD. He also enjoys wrangling his 4 kids, reading, playing video games, working out, and exploring nature on foot, bike, and Jeep. I'm so excited to have you on the show today, Rodney, and I know that you would like to open up the space today with a personal message, so go right ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Bobby. I really appreciate you having me here and asking me on. I'm sorry for that interruption. The phone, I forgot to silence it, but that's life, and that's the nature of what
It sure is, man.
Yeah, that's the nature of what I'm trying to teach people is that things are going to pop up constantly, and we don't have to react. We don't have to respond. We get to choose our response. We get to have agency as long as we're awake to ourselves in this moment. And I'd like to open up the space with the healer's prayer. This is a prayer that I will always pray at the beginning of my Zoom meetings. I started Heal Our Healers during COVID, and there was no human contact at that time in September of 2020. And so I began doing support group meetings online. And this is the prayer that I found, and I just thought it was a beautiful way to open that space. And I feel like it's a beautiful way to open this space. It goes like this. Let me dedicate my life today to the care of those who come my way. Let me touch each one with healing hands for the gentle art for which I stand. Let the divine force flow from me to you. Let our energy and spirit renew. And then tonight, when the day is done, let me rest in peace if I helped one. And I think this is just a beautiful way to live our lives. I think this is a beautiful goal for us is we don't have to do the huge, big things. All I have to do is just touch one person that day or touch one person with my outreach and my job's done.
No, I think that's a powerful message. It's something, you hear often, hey, if you just touch one person today, then you've done a great job. And you think about that, you extrapolate that out. Okay, well, then that means in a year you touch 365 people and it compounds over time. So I do think that's a very powerful message. But yeah, man. So to start us off, I think every single healthcare professional, especially if you were working through COVID, you've been touched by burnout or compassion fatigue at some point. So I'd love it if you would just share with us what your experience has been with that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I grew up in a very blue collar, rural environment, and dad was a construction worker, mom was a nurse. Dad would come home dirty, mom would come home in these, white scrubs. And I looked at her books. Her books were really cool. I saw all sorts of elephantiasis and goiters, sub-Saharan Africa, and all sorts of infectious diseases. And I just thought, this is really cool. My dad would always tell me, get a job under the air conditioner, son. And so I decided whenever I was going to choose my career path after graduating high school that I wanted to be a nurse. And so I struggled to graduate nursing school at Auburn in the best position I could so that I could get into a good ICU. Got into the ICU, CVICU in Montgomery, Alabama, worked nights for 2 years, struggled to get into anesthesia school, had a list, but got into UAB immediately, got very lucky, was afforded the opportunity to graduate from UAB in 2001. And then I married my wife while we were in school, and we traveled a little bit, worked really hard, started having a family and kids. So fast forward 10 years, and now it's 2011 or so, and I am neck deep in raising toddlers and being an on-call CRNA and managing a home and trying to think about my health and wellness and bills and family obligations. Then I looked around and I started noticing that some of my colleagues were drinking too much, in my estimation, and that turned out to be a thing, and doing other activities that weren't, some of the most wholesome, healthy activities. And I was engaging in some of those activities. I was staying up too late. I was not prioritizing my sleep. I was obese. I was depressed. I was stressed. And then I had a friend who ended up taking her life with propofol. And she was amazing. She was like a go-getter. She was outgoing. She was, in every sense of the word, she was top-notch, upper-tier, intelligent educator and mentor. And then later on down the road, I had another friend of mine, classmate, who drank himself to death. And in the meantime, I've had 3 good close friends who had to go to rehab for substance use disorder. These are like really close friends that I talk to every single day. And so it became very clear to me that there was something going on in our profession. There was something going on inside of me, but we're not taught to interocept. And so I'd never really looked inside. I looked outside the world, and I was super driven, super goal oriented, type A, perfectionist, wanting to get it all right every day. And that's impossible in the operating room. And when our output is human care, when our output is somebody's mother, father, son, daughter, then if we have a bad day or if we have a slip up, we're incredibly hard on ourselves because, our production is somebody's well-being in life. And so I began to look inside of myself and trying to figure out, why am I suffering so badly? And I began to search for words to describe what I was feeling. And so this all grew out of me trying to heal myself and help myself stop harming myself with some of my improper behaviors. They weren't feeding me, they were depleting me further, but I felt like they were feeding me. I thought that, drinking at the end of the day was kind of calming me down, relaxing me. And I thought that staying up playing video games till like 1 a.m. was helping me unwind and get my mind off everything. But it was really just impacting my sleep and my ability to be resilient the next day. And so I found Dr. Figley at the Green Cross has a PDF online that I just came across, and that whole PDF was about compassion fatigue. And I'd never really heard the word compassion fatigue or been educated about compassion fatigue. But when I read those words, I was like, yeah, I got that. And then I read that just being a caregiver puts you at risk for compassion fatigue. So if you care for your wife, which we all do as husbands, then that puts you at risk for compassion fatigue. If you have children and you're caring for them, that puts you at risk. If you have elderly parents or a special needs sibling or anyone else that's living with you in your home, that puts you at risk for compassion fatigue. Not to mention our profession as healthcare providers and healers, we're constantly being depleted of our compassion, and we are at real risk of being in compassion fatigue. And so I began to dig into that document, learn words like vicarious trauma, where you absorb trauma from the people you're around, their stories, their experiences. I began to study about clinically acquired PTSD and understand what that looks like and how that applies to my life. I began to understand all these things that I've been feeling and that had been going on inside of me. And so then I came to the place like, okay, what am I going to do about it? Like, I have vocabulary now. I've got this a way to articulate my suffering and names and tags, but what do I do? So then I started to go back to just my basics of nursing and the things that I know work for me. So I know that nature helped me. And so I began to study about nature. And that's when I came in contact with Shinrin-yoku, which is the Japanese art of forest bathing and just being out into the forest helps decrease your cortisol levels, helps to increase your heart rate variability. I started listening to podcasts like the Rich Roll podcast and came across Zach Bush, who's a physician, but a kind of a holistic medicine physician. And he talked about restoring your microbiome from spending time in nature, just breathing in those particles, especially if it's like a fern-rich environment, that we can replenish our microbiome. So then I started studying about the microbiome. Then my wife and I, unfortunately, ended up went through a divorce, and that was extremely challenging and difficult. But it put me in a position where I could start over and I could have some quietness in my life. And so I dug into my health and well-being with diet, exercise, yoga, meditation. And so that's kind of the genesis of Heal Our Healers. I took all these things that I learned when the world started burning down in 2020. I said that I've seen enough, I've done enough. We were in trouble and I was seeing a problem before COVID. And I just had to do something. So I started September 25th, I think, of 2020. I opened up the website, the Heal Our Healers Facebook group.
That's an incredible story. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned there, which was clinical PTSD, because we often think of PTSD as something that's for people who are maybe in the military or who have had, unspeakable trauma done to them. So how does PTSD apply to nurses and physicians in the U.S.? Because I know myself, I never went through, I didn't consider it to be major traumas.
Yeah.
Although, maybe you have a poor outcome in a case or, a patient dies on you in the ICU and a half an hour later, you've got a new patient in that room and you're supposed to be hunky dory. But at the same time, I never thought of PTSD as applying to me. So what have you seen when it comes to clinical PTSD?
Yeah, so the definition of PTSD is a strong traumatic event that occurs in your life, and it creates such a sympathetic outflow and a powerful emotional environment that it creates a gravity well or a permanent anchor inside of your psyche. And that gravity well is constantly pulling at you. And that anchor is so firmly entrenched into the sands of your mind that it pulls you back always. And so we talk about triggers. Triggers are sights, smells, sounds, phrases, environments, anything that occurs to you after the insult occurred, and it causes you to be pulled back to that insult. So let's say that you've been escaping this gravity well, this traumatic event that occurred, and you've been walking your way out through life and things are going pretty good until you hear a car horn or you smell a certain fragrance that you smelled. Maybe you're taking care of a patient in the ICU and you're an ICU nurse and you guys had peppermint oil in the room because the patient had a wound that was stinky and you were just trying to make it better for you, or you had it on your mask. And maybe the patient coded and you worked that code and you had a strong relationship with that patient. You guys have become friends because you've been working with each other for weeks or months, and you lost that patient. That is a massive trauma for that person. And let's say, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, somebody offers you a peppermint, or, you go across to a store that has peppermint, it brings you back to that same trauma. So that's one of the characteristics of a PTSD event. Other characteristics are reliving the event where you think about it constantly or you have dreams about it. Some of the other symptoms are emotional numbing, where you end up feeling like you're a robot. So you're depersonalized or derealized. Derealization is where life doesn't seem real. It seems like a movie, like you're watching it happen to you, but you're not behind your eyes into your body. Depersonalization is where you feel like a robot and you're just going through life numb and you're numbed out. Avoidance, I can't take a patient in room 12 anymore, or I can't work in OR3 because, I had that kid, who had MH that day and we almost lost him and it's my fault. Or, I didn't recognize I had an extubation in that robot case and things were going sideways and I had to call in for help. And now I'm so embarrassed and I'm ashamed. And luckily we didn't have a really bad outcome, but now I feel like, I'm a pathetic provider and I just can't, I can't face that room anymore. So those are all clinically acquired PTSD symptoms. And we do have PTSD. If you are a nurse or any caregiver, if you're a chaplain services, clinical social work, dietitian, transporter, you've had something happen to you that was really scary and super troubling, and you probably still think about it. And if that is the case, then that's a PTSD event.
I mean, I don't know about anybody else who's listening to this, but like I'm sitting here cycling through all of the memories and things. You mentioned peppermint oil. I'm like, okay, well, anytime I smell cloves now, it takes me right back to the ICU because the creams that we used in the ICU had clove oil in them, and so it takes me back to taking care of these, very, very ill patients. And, hey, within the first 6 months of my career, I mean, my chief CRNA who hired me to my first job, he committed suicide. And he was a guy who was quick to smile, quick to laugh. He always had a joke, but he battled demons that those of us who were around him just didn't have any idea about.
Yeah.
And I got his locker afterwards. So it was kind of this weird moment in my life. And I thought there was meaning behind that because I thought there's got to be a reason why I'm getting his locker. We were tied somehow, and coincidences.
It was a way to honor him. Every day when you opened up that locker, you thought about him.
Yeah, I did. And I battled my own demons, which ultimately resulted in me leaving the profession. So I guess it's a roundabout way of coming to the question of like, what kind of advice do you have for people who, are listening right now and they're like, hey, I've got this stuff going on too. I can pinpoint all of these different times in my life, in my career. And I remember these moments.
Question. That's a great question, Bobby.
Yeah.
I'm going to use the analogy from the movie Arnold Schwarzenegger, Predator. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a really great movie. But this metaphor is there is a shadow that moves among us, and it's been moving among us since the beginning of time. And it's secretive, and it's oily, and it's dark, and it's hard to see. It lives in the shadows, and it slides, and it moves just like the predator does in the jungle. And you don't see it. You're not aware of it. It just moves through your life unnoticed. But just like the predator, once they finally were able to understand his camouflage, he had this camouflage that would make him almost invisible. There was a slight distortion of the jungle. Once you are armed with the knowledge, and once you have the language to describe the situations, then you're armed with the ability to begin to see this serpent that slides in the shadows, right? And that's constantly attacking us because of our clinically acquired PTSD, because of the vicarious trauma, because of the compassion fatigue, because of the mounting issues that contribute to burnout, and because of the intrusive thoughts about, I can't do this job anymore, but I don't want to leave this job because I'm a caregiver. So maybe it'd just be better if I ended my life so I wouldn't have to deal with the shame of running away from the thing that I love that I was called to do. And so that is what I'm on a journey to do, is to help people see this cloaked predator that's in our midst.
Yeah. No, man, it's so fascinating to me because this is so many of these terms. Well, some of them you threw out there I'd never heard of. Be just honest about that.
Good.
But others,
that's great.
Others I didn't hear about until after I had already left the profession.
Yeah, exactly.
Compassion fatigue, imposter syndrome, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's not talked about in your classes, and you're not prepared for it. I feel like when you get out into the real world. So I think it's so important to start talking about those things. And I do want to pivot for a second because we mentioned in the opener that, you're a trained hypnotist. So I'd love to hear more about that journey because the research has been out there for years that hypnotism can have really beneficial effects for people. What's been your experience in your journey with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And for any of you who are rolling your eyes right now, just go to the Andrew Huberman podcast, the Huberman Lab, and search his episode on hypnosis. I can't remember the guy's name at Stanford, but it is a formally accepted, double-blind, peer-reviewed science. All hypnotism is a person like me who helps guide you to a place of EEG activity in your brain where your critical faculty, the frontal lobe, is a little bit less active, and you have access to your subconscious. So that if you have programs that are running, which we all have, environmental, cultural, situational algorithms in our brain that we follow, like water that runs down a hill creates a gully or a gulch or a runnel or a reel. And whenever you pour water from the top of that hill or it rains, it's always going to follow those same tracks and paths. And a lot of times those tracks and paths are not beneficial to us as human beings, as caregivers, as fathers, as brothers, as sons, as anesthetists. And so the hypnotist helps you to lay down a fresh layer of topsoil on that hillside in your mind and helps you establish new pathways, new neural networks. If you have tangles that keep pulling you back to the same place, like those emotional triggers, environmental triggers for PTSD, the hypnotist can assist you in doing the work to break those bungee cords that are attached to the anchor that keep pulling you back to that situation. And so all we are Sherpas or guides that help you take your physiology, your neuroanatomy to the place that you need to go so that you can do some work that you need to do.
That's a really fantastic way to put it, because I think a lot of people tend to think of like, okay, well, I went to the circus and there was a hypnotist, or I went to the fair and there was a hypnotist. And
that's fair. We see a lot
like
of that.
Chickens, because that's the experience that people have with that. And I feel like that's the stigma that's kind of kept hypnotism from really taking the world of healthcare by storm.
Yeah. And it can be both, right? Like you can have fun with it at parties. Like I could do, a party with my daughter's friends and we could do something like that. But also I could sit down with you and help you work on some tremendous impediments to your personal growth and traumas that you have. And I have done that with clients. Mm. And so it doesn't just have to be serious. It can also be really fun. It can be super relaxing. There's something that Huberman talks about a lot that came out of the Eastern tradition of yoga called Yoga Nidra, which is non-sleep deep rest protocols. And these are just 20-minute guided hypnosis sessions that help you get into a deep state of relaxation, which mimics sleep and provide a lot of the same benefits as sleep and rest inside of your body. And so hypnosis, it is a very versatile tool. I use it every day in my life with my clients, with my interactions with the public, parenting, I use it. And we go through hypnosis all the time. Every time you go to sleep, you pass through from beta, which is the phase that you and I are in right now. We're in high beta because we're utilizing our minds. We're thinking of things. We're very active. And then we go into alpha, which is a little bit slower brain waves. And then we go into theta and delta. Delta is sleep. And so hypnosis occurs in the alpha range and the theta range. And there's about 20% of the population that are highly hypnotizable. There's about 60% that are moderately hypnotizable. And there's about 20% that are difficult. And of those difficult, there's maybe 1 to 5% that just will not be hypnotized because they have so many barriers and layers and trust issues that they'll never allow themselves to go to that place because of issues with vulnerability.
That is fascinating to me, because I've always wondered about that, because I've been to, some of those shows, and I was even on stage for one. I volunteered, and I'm up there the whole time thinking like, this can't be real. Like, this isn't real. This is not happening. And I didn't feel any kind of effects. I didn't feel anything. And so I think it's fascinating that research has been done to figure out, those kinds of rough percentages.
Yeah, there's actually a test you can do. The guy from Stanford named it, but you have the client look at you, and then they watch your finger move up as high as it can. And depending on the whites of the eyes, how much of the whites of the eyes are showing, it kind of indicates what level of hypnotizability that person has. I don't use that tool because whenever I'm engaging with a client, I'm going to assume that we're going to develop a therapeutic rapport, and that no matter what level of resistance they have, that trust will overcome their resistance and skepticism, and ultimately they'll get the work done. And if I don't maintain that position, then I'm not going to be very effective.
Yeah. What types of people are reaching out to you to get help through hypnosis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've worked with people that have chronic anxiety. I've worked with people that have panic attacks. I've worked with children that had head traumas and chronic headaches, chronic pain, sports performance, test performance. And I actually am a go-to now for the urology group when they have a patient that's cleared because of ED and they're medically cleared and they can't find a reason. I'm the guy that they send those patients to help those men overcome their barriers that are preventing them from being sexually healthy.
That's incredible. I would have never even thought about something like that.
Yeah. It's diverse. Primarily I deal with anxiety and pain because I'm a nurse anesthetist. That's sort of what I do every day pharmacologically, and I'm very familiar with that. And so I would say that's the cornerstone of my practice, but I'm really happy to see, people that have other issues, because a lot of times chronic pain overlaps with anxiety and overlaps with some of these conditions like migraine headaches, interstitial cystitis, fibromyalgia. And the thing that we have to understand is the human organism is super complex Rube Goldberg machine, and everything is connected, right? And so when we talk about wellness, we can't talk about chronic pain if we don't talk about diet. And we can't talk about constipation if we don't talk about the exercise and hydration. And so whenever I'm interacting with a patient for hypnosis, there's also a huge wellness component that we have to talk about too, and see if we can't dial some things in.
Yeah, I guess there's just so much that this can apply to, and that I would not have considered before. And I've had some people on who have, been in hypnosis before, but we never went down some of those avenues. So, I appreciate you sharing that, because it's just, like I said, it's just, there's got to be so many applications. It's normally been something where it's like peeling back traumas and, and helping with pain management, which obviously you have that kind of training. So that's something that you can utilize.
I have to thank Ron for Heal Our Healers. If I wasn't a trained hypnotist, I don't think I would have the confidence, and maybe I wouldn't have developed the toolbox for healing and trauma repair that I've developed because of the training I had with Ron and understanding hypnosis. Is that you understand there's tremendous inter-individual variability. What works for one person is not going to work for another person.
Yeah.
And I have to understand if your major mode of communication is kinesthetic, or is it vision oriented? Is it gustatory, auditory? So learning hypnosis was a huge part of me understanding that we all heal differently, just like we are all induced into hypnosis differently. And there are lots of different paths to get a person to that alpha theta brain state. And just like anesthesia, I mean, my whole life experience has kind of been layering together to create this. But, there's all sorts of different anesthetics. And they always say there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Mm-hmm. And while one of your colleagues may do, an ankle block with some mild sedation, you might throw in an LMA. Somebody else might put down an endotracheal tube. Somebody else might do an epidural. Somebody else might do a different set of pain blocks than you did. Instead of an ankle block, they'll do, femoral or something. There's lots of different ways, and there's lots of different mechanisms that we can utilize to get to the places that we need to go.
To me, that was part of the profession that I really enjoyed, was the art of it. That you had these different tools in your toolbox, and you could bring them out depending on the situation you were in, and you could cater to the patients that you had. I thought that was a very, powerful kind of thing. Yeah. And it was something that I truly drew joy from. Creating this painting, if you will, with a particular patient and case and all of that. So,
I talk to my students about that. Like, your primer coat is your initial interaction with your patient, your therapeutic rapport that you establish when you walk in the room. And when you walk into the room, talking about hypnosis again, as you walk into that room with scrubs on, or your jacket, white jacket, and your stethoscope and your scrub hat, that attire automatically sets an expectation in the person's mind that you're a caregiver. And so for the moment you walk into a patient's room is almost a form of hypnotic induction. Mm-hmm. That's the introduction to the ritual that's about to be performed. It's about to follow. And then your first words, your warm smile, the touch on the hand, acknowledging the family members in the room, intentionally providing and creating this container of compassion and care and love. I'm going to say the word love. We don't use the word love enough in healthcare, and they don't use the word love in research. But what we're doing as nurses, what we're doing as doctors, what we're doing as PTs, OTs, we're loving our community. We're loving our patients. And if you're not, then I don't think you're doing it right.
That's going to do it for today's show. As mentioned at the top of the episode, this is the first of my two-part conversation with Rodney, so make sure you tune in next week for our conclusion. If you'd like to reach out to Rodney and learn more about hypnosis or Heal Our Healers, just check out the show notes for his contact info. Thanks so much for listening. This is Bobby Jones signing off. Until next time, stay safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.